Extra Mile. I'm Linda Boudreau. Our guest today is Bruce Turner. Bruce is Assistant Dean for Special Collections at ULL. And we're going to be talking about those special collections and what they have over there. So, Bruce, welcome.
Thank you.
And it's good to have you. It's been a long time since I've seen you.
Yeah,
so
it has
it's
been
nice
quite
to
a while.
reconnect. It's really nice to reconnect. So how are things at UL these days?
With the budget cuts, they are very tenuous.
That's true. Do you think the budget cuts are going to affect the special collections department?
They have in the fact that we have no money to go out and purchase collections. We have very little money to buy supplies to house the collections that we do have. We have had no increase in personnel because of budget cuts. So we were supposed to get another staff member this year, but with the budget cut, we lost that position.
Yeah. So it's affecting everything.
Yeah, it's affecting the entire university.
And I think that special collections are important for lots of reasons, but in my opinion, one of them is because that's kind of where we archive a lot of our history and the important events of our lives, huh?
The Acadiana Manuscript Collection documents many aspects of the Acadiana region, the history of the region. We have collections on agriculture, we have collections on families, we have collections on individuals, on education, on politics, and they document the history of the region.
I guess I don't know that our audience really knows what a special collection really is. I mean, what does that mean? What are we talking about?
At UL, the Special Collections Department has 5 components to it. The Microforms Division, and all of them are in Dupree Library.
Okay.
The Microforms Division is on first floor.
And that would be what?
That is newspapers on microfilm, theses and dissertations on microfilm, periodicals,
Okay.
a lot of books on microfilm. That used to be the old way to preserve material.
I didn't realize, are we still microfilming things?
It is not done nearly as much now because everything's gone digital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of old microfilm.
But there's
there.
a lot of old
Okay.
microfilm.
And that's
we're
on the first
preserving that.
floor at Dupree Library.
Correct.
Okay.
And then on the third floor, in the new addition of the library, there is the Gaines Center and the Cajun and Creole Music Collection. The Gaines Center houses the papers of Ernest Gaines, the famous African-American author, who was a writer in residence at UL for 24 years before he retired. And he is one of the seminal writers in American literature in the 20th century.
So we're really privileged to have him as a part of our community.
Right.
Yeah.
And his wife is on the board for the Gaines Center, so she comes to the center once a month for meetings. So she's very active yet. And Ernie, Derek Mosley, who is the archivist at the Gaines Center, and I just went to their house. They live over on False River now. He actually lives on the plantation where he grew up. They built a house on the land. And they have moved the church, which was his schoolhouse when he was a kid. They moved that behind their house in Oscar. And that played a very important position in his book, Lesson Before Dying.
Yeah.
And that is right outside their back door now.
See how life can come full circle? You know, if you just keep plugging away. Huh?
And the cemetery where a lot of his family is buried, he and his wife take care of. And every All Saints Day, they have a family gathering of Gaines family that come from all over the United States, and they go to the cemetery and clean it up.
You know, I would say that's special, but I think that's more than special. I think that's really sacred.
Yeah,
that is just,
well,
that
the
is,
cemetery in a number of Gaines's books is very important symbolically because it is one of the few places where he knows that his family resides.
And they're safe there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, for a while they weren't safe because in a couple of the books he talks about the fact that the cemetery might be bulldozed over because they need more sugarcane land.
Wow, yeah.
But since he and his wife bought the
Yeah.
cemetery, that's not going to
They're
happen.
good. They're safe there now.
Right.
They weren't safe there forever, but they're safe there for now.
Right.
Well, I think that's just so wonderful and
Yeah.
so fortunate for them, and again, for all of us to have that, to have
Yeah,
them in our,
Gaines has a
in our
very,
midst.
very important sense of family, and the cemetery is a real root of it. Yeah.
and I actually can understand that.
Yeah.
I really can. So we have a Gaines, the Gaines
The
collection.
Gaines Center, and in
center.
that same area is the Cajun and Creole Music Collection.
Let me just ask you about the Gaines Center first. That's all his work and his writings.
Right
and
now,
his
it
materials?
is his literary collection is there, and we're starting to bring in his collection of correspondence and photographs and so on, which is presently at Oscar, but we're bringing that over a little bit at a
Okay.
time.
So we'll begin eventually to consolidate.
We'll eventually have
those
all of his
documents.
material in the Gaines Center.
Okay.
And Derek Mosley has put in a grant to digitize that collection. We don't know yet whether we've received it or not,
Okay.
but that will make it accessible to people all over the world if we can do that.
So we're going to kind of venture quickly into digitization, and we'll drop it, and then we'll come back to it again. But in doing so, in digitizing it, as you said, it will be accessible, but we'll still have the original materials.
We'll have the original material here,
So
right?
it'll just make it another way where people, another method by which people can access.
Yeah, it makes it accessible to people without having to come to the Dupre Library to look
Yeah,
at it.
well, I think you ought to come and park in there anyway.
Well, when you live in Sweden, or a lot of people, well, a number of people in the Orient study Gaines. In Rwanda last fall, there was a national book reading effort, and they used Lesson Before Dying as the book that everybody in Rwanda read.
I had no idea that his reach was so far,
Oh,
so
yeah,
global.
yeah.
I had no idea.
International scope.
I think of him as being a really wonderful writer from here.
Well, he is,
You
but
know.
his books are read all over.
and honored.
And we have translations of his books into, I think, like 24 languages or something like that.
And
Yeah.
he's such a modest, unassuming person, huh?
Mhm. Yeah, he is
Yeah.
a wonderful person.
I guess what I want people to know that are watching about a collection like this is what is its significance? What is its importance? Why do we invest archive space, library space, staff time to a collection like this?
Well, I processed the literary collection of Gaines, but he donated back in the mid-'80s. And one of the fascinating things about it, he initially started out handwriting the drafts of his books.
and you have those handwritten drafts?
And we have those handwritten drafts. Certainly for our biography, Miss Jane Pittman and Gathering of Old Men, which are my two favorite Gaines books. But in Gathering of Old Men, he started out with a single voice, and then when it was published in multiple voices. So the concept of the book changed drastically from the initial draft to the final publication. And it's just very interesting to see how that evolved from one draft to another.
As the book came to life for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he changed the way that he wanted to present his
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
And because we have the literary manuscripts, we're able to follow that. And if those had not been preserved, then we wouldn't have known anything
Right.
about that process.
And the process matters, doesn't it?
It certainly matters to people who want to understand what Gaines was trying to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, and that's why a collection is important, is
Mhm.
because it gives you a broader context to understand or to appreciate
Right.
or to delve into the thinking of an author in this case.
Yeah, and then the correspondence often is correspondence to people who have read Gaines's books, and they talk about the impact of those books on their lives, or how they reacted to them, or how they didn't like them, or they liked them, or the things that they liked in them, and things like that. So from the correspondence, you can get a reading of how the books were accepted by the public.
And I bet you over time, there's a change in that as well.
I'd imagine so,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Okay. So we got that there, the Gaines collection is there. Anybody can go. Do you have to make an appointment to go?
No, as long as it's open, you have to be there during the hours that the Gaines Center is open, but it's open to the public.
And when you're handling the materials, are there any restrictions?
not for the Gaines material, but for some of the material like in the rare book room or so on, that is fragile.
Right.
We requested people wear gloves when.
Okay.
And if the material is fragile, we don't allow photocopying.
Because,
Because
the
you can
photocopy
damage
copy.
it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so busy thinking of my iPhone. And I'm just.
No, we allow digital
Okay,
pictures,
okay.
but photocopying
Yeah.
sometimes can damage
I
material.
just had a moment.
Right, yeah.
We were
Old
talking about that
technology.
earlier. We were talking about that earlier, the changes in technology. Okay, so let's talk about the Creole music.
The Cajun and Creole Music Collection started in 2004 with a grant from the Board of Regents. And the heads of that collection is Sandy Email, and they are trying to collect all of the commercial recordings of Cajun, Creole, swamp pop, South Louisiana music.
Holy cow, that's going to be a lot, huh?
And they have probably over 75,000 now.
Wow.
Dating from 1928, which was the Joe Falcone's recording of Alonzo Lafayette, the first recording of Cajun music.
Is
And
that is the
they have a
first
couple
recording?
copies of that.
How does it sound? Is this?
I haven't
heard
heard it. I've
it?
only heard it on CD.
Okay,
I haven't
yeah.
heard the original 78s.
Wow, I bet they're a little bit scratchy, but just totally wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you even find that stuff? I mean,
Um,
people's attics?
Sandy goes through catalogs. A fair amount of material has been donated. She's made contact with individual artists, and they donate material. For instance, we just got a large collection from Johnny Allen, the swamp pop
Yeah, yeah.
artist. He donated not only his recordings, all of his records, he also donated his correspondence and donated a huge collection of photographs.
Because his mother, I think, was related to the Falcons, I believe.
I believe you're right.
Yeah,
right,
so,
yeah.
you know, that he would have had access, I would imagine, to a lot of all
Oh,
of
yeah,
that,
he,
you know?
he knew everybody.
So with the music one, you actually have the recordings there.
The Cajun and Creole Music Collection has the recordings. Actually, the Johnny Allen collection was divided up between 3 different repositories, depending on what they were interested
Okay,
in.
okay.
The commercial recordings went to the Cajun and Creole Music Collection. The correspondence came to us for the Acadiana archives. And the photographs went to the Center for Cultural and Ecotourism because they have the capabilities of digitizing them.
Okay, so there's a whole lot to all of this, isn't there? It
Oh,
isn't
yeah.
like you just get a collection from somebody and say, great, I'll put it on the shelf. That is not,
Most collections we keep together, but this particular collection was so large it was divided up.
how nice of him to do that, huh?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it must be good for him too, because all of these things that matter to him will matter to all of us.
And we are digitizing a lot of the material so that he will have a copy of it, a digital copy of it himself, and we will have the originals in the library.
And so the originals will last forever, and he can just play
Well,
as
we
long
hope
as he
they
wants
last
to.
forever, right.
As long as he wants to. Why is it important to save the music?
Well, music is an extremely important element of Cajun culture.
Or of any culture,
And,
huh?
well,
Yeah.
certainly Cajun culture. And it's one of the major elements of the revival of Cajun culture in
Yeah.
the 1970s.
Yeah.
And Cajun music is probably more appreciated now in Europe and in Asia than it is here, although a lot of people here are,
We like it a lot.
well, yeah, and California has Cajun bands, but Europe, almost all Cajun musicians have toured Europe because there's such a market for their music over there.
Who'd have thought?
Yeah.
You know, who'd have thought? I was listening to an interview on KRBS the other day, and it was about festivals of Cayenne coming up, and they were saying, you know, back in the day, when the musicians played, they played for dances. They never thought about playing in an arena where people just sat and listened to them. And then you realize again how alive the music is, how ingrained it is in who we are.
Yeah, those fado were extremely important in Cajun social life. And of course, they had local bands that played for them. They had to have the chicken wire up in case the fight broke out and they started throwing beer bottles or anything, at least in the dance halls.
So in the archive then, what can we expect to find if I was to go there?
In the University Archives and Acadiana Manuscripts Collection, we have the University Archives, the records of the university, and we have a really complete file from the Office of the President, dating back to 1900, when Edwin Louis Stevenson was first hired.
Is that when the university started?
The university was actually passed by approved by the legislature in 1896, but the governor refused to fund it. So we had funding problems from the state when it was originally founded.
Well, then why should we be surprised?
And then it was reauthorized in 1898 under the leadership of Robert Martin from St. Martinville, who was in the state legislature at the time. And at that, Governor Murray Foster, who was the grandfather of Mike Foster, signed it the second time it was approved. And a board of trustees was organized, and several communities competed to host it. And Lafayette was chosen, and Edwin L. Stevens, who was at the time 28 years old, was chosen by the board to be the first president. And we have records starting from the first Board of Trustees meeting when Stevens was introduced as the president
Wow.
in January of 1928.
Do we know why Lafayette was chosen?
Yeah, Lafayette was chosen because Croix Girard and his mother offered 25 acres of land. The city, under the leadership of Charles Caffrey, who was the mayor, agreed to levy a couple of taxes,
Okay.
and the money went to support the institute. It was Southwestern Louisiana Industrial Institute at the time, basically a junior high school. But the city supported it more than New Iberia and Scott, which are the other competing communities, and that's why they chose Lafayette for the site.
Because we were willing to invest
Mhm.
in it, which.
Because the city got behind it.
So in terms of archiving, the whole story of the university is there, and I'll ask you that same question: why is that important? Why would we care?
Well, it's important because the saying is, if you don't understand your history, you're going to repeat it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So to understand why things developed, how they developed, the records document that, and you can go back and look at it. One of the interesting things that we have involves the 1954 integration.
Oh, I bet that is, huh?
And that was when Joel Fletcher was president. But we have documents of the court case that was brought about some black students tried to register for classes in 1953. They were turned
At
down.
UL?
It was
SLI?
SLI at the
At
time,
uh-huh.
right. They were turned down, and they took the case to court, backed by the NCAA Legal Defense Fund. Thurgood Marshall was one of the lawyers involved in the case. And we have all the documentation about this court case, which was finally decided in Shreveport on behalf of the litigants. And that's when SLI was told to integrate.
Was it done peacefully?
It was done peaceful.
Okay.
We have some oral history recordings of Glenn Abel, who was the dean of Min at the time. And he talks about the effort that was made by the administration to make sure it was peaceful. And he says that the Cajun culture, Cajuns were very accepting, and they had no problems. They had a couple of problems, but they addressed them immediately, and they never festered. So they never got out of hand.
Okay.
Abel told all the students that if they had any problem whatsoever, that they came to him immediately, and he dealt with it right then. And there were a couple faculty members who told the blacks to sit in the back of the class and things like that. And the black students complained to Abel, and he went to the faculty member and said, "We're not going to allow that."
And so it was handled.
It was handled.
It was handled.
Yeah.
And with Grace, because I knew Glenn Abel well. He had great
Oh, he
Grace.
was an incredible man.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So the history then is important, partly so that we know how we got to be who we are today, and so that maybe we won't make some of those same mistakes
Hopefully.
again. We hope.
Yeah,
We hope.
and as a historian,
Because you are a historian. You
I'm a
PhDs in
historian.
history.
I have a PhD in history, and that's how I got into archival work. But I just find the study of history to be a fascinating study of human nature.
I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking it's all about the people.
And,
It's
and
all,
human nature doesn't change over time.
It doesn't. It
Yeah.
doesn't. There's just so many ways we can play these lives out,
Mhm.
and how we choose to do it determines the course we take.
Yeah, and the documents show how people dealt with the issues that they confronted in their lifetime in the past.
Is that what you love about it?
Yeah. As a trained historian, I became interested in preserving historical documents because they explain how people lived. And if we didn't have the documents, we wouldn't know any of that.
And they show us how they thought, and how they arrived at their conclusions. Huh?
Yeah, and how they dealt with the problems that they confronted. And documentation can take many forms. We have mainly papers, letters, diaries, reports in the archives and things like that. But also we have a lot of photographs. We have an incredible collection from the Barnett Studio in Crowley, dating from 1904 through the 1950s. And Crowley used to have a red light district.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. Kind of like Storyville, the junior Storyville.
Really? A big one then, huh?
Well, no, it
Big
wasn't
for
nearly.
Crowley.
For Crowley, it was pretty big before World War I. And the Barnett Studio has one photograph on a glass plate negative of a fairly scantily clad female, probably late teens or early 20s. And I've always figured that was one of the prostitutes of Crowley. But it's not identified as that.
But part of the history. How did you end up with that photographic collection?
Paul Freeland, who was a Presbyterian minister in Crowley, was very, very interested in local history. This was back in the 60s and 70s. The Barnett Studio actually closed in the 50s, but Freeland knew about the collection. And somebody bought the studio building and was going to throw it all out.
Ooh.
So Freeland went in and saved a lot of it and donated to the university, and the university got a grant from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission in the late 70s, and with that grant, they cleaned up all of the photographs that they got, they microfilmed them, so that we now have a microfilm copy of it, so when people want to come in and look at the Freeland, or the Barnett collection, we
They can do
show them the
microfilm.
microfilm, we don't have to pull out the originals.
Great, great.
Yeah.
We're getting a little close to the end, and there are a couple things I want to talk about real quickly. One is, are there any collections or are there any materials that you all are just dying to get now? Is there anything on the horizon that would be just perfect
One
to
of the
have?
things that I have been very interested in getting more documentation on what we call the underrepresented elements of the community. And I have been fairly successful in getting a lot of material on women's groups. Like we have the AAUW records and the Lafayette AAUW chapter was very, very active for a
And for
long
people that
period of
don't know,
time.
that's the American Association of University Women?
American Association of University Women. We have the records of the League of Women Voters of Lafayette. We have the papers of Ollie Osborne, who was
yeah.
one of my favorite people. Died in the mid-90s, but she was just a little fireplace.
She was wonderful.
We have the papers of Mary Alice Fontenot, another one of my favorite people. We don't have as good a representation of the African American community.
Okay.
So I'd like to get more material from that. We have oral history tapes from Carlton James, who was a major figure.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have papers of W.D. Smith, who was an educator in the black community. But I'd like to get a lot more documentation on the African American community.
So I guess, because we're almost out of time, then can we make a call for people in our community that have some of this to maybe get in touch with you?
Sure.
Because you can donate some of these materials, and the university will keep them and keep them safe, and then we can all benefit. Is that a fair statement,
That
Bruce?
is a wonderful statement.
So, and I think it's really important because we're all in this together.
Yeah.
This is us.
Yeah, this is a way to preserve the culture of the community.
Okay, so anybody that has anything, bring it on.
Thank you very much.
The university will thank you, Bruce will thank you. Bruce, thank you so much for being with us.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
We didn't get to talk about digitization or any of the other stuff, so I'm going to have to
Oh,
get
yeah,
you
we
back.
have a lot of stuff we didn't
Yeah,
cover.
you're going to have to come
Right.
back again, so we'll be seeing you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching The Extra Mile.